How's that sound? Yeah? I'm Paloma. I'm excited to be talking about a different way of looking at symmetry, the theme for the month, in particular work-life symmetry. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a trainer. I'm a coach, like a performance coach. I'm a psychology nerd. And some of you know that I also own, I'm just getting excited with this new gadget, by the way. Okay, I own 1111 Supply, which is just due east of here. Raise your hand if you've been or know of 1111 Supply. Oh my God, that makes me so happy. Okay, because we just opened 7 months ago. So I own 11 Supply. It's a store that curates beautiful office supplies and work tools, home organizing stuff, but the main thing that we try to give you is the psychology and knowledge tips for how to use those tools so that you're more productive and feel happy, all those things. So 7 months ago we opened, and before we opened, I thought, okay, around the 6th month, I know that right now I'm working insane hours, like 70, 80 hours a week. But around the 6th month, I don't know why I thought 6 months, but around the 6th month, it's gonna start stabilizing. And I'll be able to kind of do other stuff besides live and breathe the store. We're 7 months in, and I was recently looking, kind of at my work week, maybe a month or so ago, and realizing there was no end in sight. And so to like the amount of work that I was doing. And so I tallied my hours, and I was like, yeah, I'm about 60 hours a week, which, by the way, we have about 100 hours outside of like brushing our teeth and like commuting and sleeping, about 100 hours in the week, which means that 60 hours I was using towards the company and about 40 are free hours. And I was starting to feel guilty because I knew that there was no end in sight to the 60 hours a week. And I was starting to think that I was like my own worst boss because I wasn't doing anything about to really change this situation. Because I wouldn't ask a worker to work 60 hours a week. And around this time, I read that the average American worker works, anyone know how many hours a week on average we work in the US? Just shout it out. Any guesses? 50, 45? Oh, you're so good. It's 47. 47 is the average. So when I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, I'm like failing at this thing. Because it's fine to do a sprint, right, of a few months when you open a new company kind of thing. So I started feeling like this, on top of the 60 hours I was working or whatever, I was carrying around this chronic guilt and shame about what a bad boss I was to myself. So I was doing all this stuff and I was like, wait a minute. This is weird because I remember creating a life for myself years ago where I really strategized to have like the ultimate American dream of only working 20 hours a week and still earning what I was earning when I was working 40 to 50 hours a week. I did that. My husband's up here, so he can count to this. We did that. We moved to a tiny town in upstate New York called Philmont, and I strategized and worked on it and achieved 20-hour work week, which left, 80 hours of free time. With the 20 hours, I was doing some trainings remotely, but I was also opening a co-working space, this is us, on Main Street in Philmont, New York, opening a co-working space. And then with the other 80 hours, I was doing awesome shit, like swimming in a waterfall around the corner, taking long walks, just, whenever. Hanging out every other day, getting happy hour with all the many friends we made there. It was awesome. We were like, what? We joked all the time about early retirement. We were like, we did it. Okay. And then a year goes by, and we're like, This is so awesome. Can't believe we live this life. And then a year later, we left it. And I moved back to Portland. My husband moved with me. And here we are. Because we got bored. We got restless. We got kind of bummed. Like, we started getting bummed out, like, just every day, not really feeling. So, again, a few months ago, I was like, okay, wait. So I'm freaked out and feeling guilty about the hours I'm working, that I'm not being a good boss to myself, and there's no end in sight. At the same time, I've done the whole American dream thing and, like, worked just 20 hours, earning the same amount of money, and I was unhappy then. So maybe I'm broken, and I'll never be happy, or something. So I was like, at this time, I was like, where did the 40-60 come from? Like, that's a funny number, kind of, 40-60. So I looked into it. And essentially the main area around the 40-60 came from is one of the big elements was the industrial era. Around 1890 is when big companies, huge companies, were hiring social scientists and asking them, hey, can you figure out how many hours we can work a human? Like before we kill them. And so that we can do that. And they said 14 to 16 a day, 6 days a week. I had to pull out my calculator when I was making the slides to be like, how much is that? That's about 90 to 100 hours a week, i.e. there's no free time, right? They had enough time, like their one day was obviously doing all the stuff that they had not done the rest of the week, like brushing their teeth, just taking care of basic things, laundry. So then came the unions, labor unions. And they were like, oh, hell no, you can't do that. You can't do that. And they fought it out. And about 50 years later, they got the 40-hour work week. Hey, labor unions. That's awesome, right? They cut it from 100 hours a week. That's a huge win. This is awesome. So I was like, okay, but here's the weird thing. It's 100 years later. We have a really different, most of us here have pretty different workplaces, right? And we're still using the 40-60. So then I was like, that's weird. Because the difference between us and them is they were divorced from their labor, as Marx would put it. They were divorced from the labor. The only thing they were getting from their labor was a little money, really very little money. But that's all they were getting. Versus, I can speak for myself, but I think a lot of us in the room get a lot from our work. I can say, when I was doing kind of researching this, I was like, I have a crush on my job. I'm infatuated. My husband's probably jealous, right? Because I'm just today and today. But I'm also obviously working a lot. So both things are true, but I feel so connected to my job. You couldn't tear it from me. So I'm like, so that's different. So then I got curious, okay, let's take this a step further. Is there a different way of thinking about life symmetry than the old 40-60 model? Knowing that circumstances are pretty different for what work does for us. And so, of course, I went to my regular fallback, which is psychology and research into neuroscience. And I was like, what are those folks saying? And the first main chunk of research that I dove back into was neuroscience. And there's a lot of neuroscientists that essentially think of symmetry as these two things. The two symmetry things are dopamine and endorphins. Neurotransmitters like dopamine and different kinds of endorphins are really, so if there was an alien in the room, how would you describe to them, those of you who are nerds like me on this stuff, how would you describe to them what having a rush of dopamines or endorphins feels like? What would your body be doing?
Woo! Sparks of joy.
Sparks of joy. Yeah. If you're me, I'm like, yes, 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 kind of. Sometimes I'm in the car and I'm like, what's up, what's up, what's up? That's endorphins and dopamine in my body. If you're more subdued and calm person, you might be like, yeah. So those are them. And then on the other side, neuroscientists are like, we need to balance those moments of dopamine and endorphins, that state, with serotonin and oxytocin. There's a few other neurotransmitters, but these are the two big ones. And then those of you who know about this, what does that look like in your body when you're feeling heavy doses of serotonin and oxytocin in your body? Relaxation. Do it with your body. Show me like you're in acting class. all of your shoulders dropped. All of you were like, yeah, it's really calming. It's very stabilizing, feels very sweet and warm, especially oxytocin. So neuroscientists are like, we need to make sure that these states of, like, mental states are balanced. You can't always be in this one. And if you're always in this one, you also don't do well long-term as a human. Psychologists kind of think about it as growth versus restorative states. I call it progress and self-care, like a sense of progress, right? Like bam, bam, bam. And of course, self-care, restoration. Sleep is part of that. So when I was doing this reading, I was already like, my brain felt different than when I was judging my life against the 40-60 symmetry. This felt different. Because if you were to ask me, hey, Paloma, what in your life currently, what activities do you do that give you that dopamine growth, progress, and endorphin feel? What are the things you say? I would say things like, well, easily, when I'm writing down and strategizing of any kind, 3-year goal, whatever, for the week, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. I feel that. Like, I might just be sitting there, but I'm feeling that sense of progress. At the same time, I also was thinking about it and was like, but there's non-work times when I feel that. I took a silks class, like a trapeze silks class, and I was doing that every week, and that felt very much endorphin-y, dopamine, because every week I felt my body changing and getting stronger and more limber, and I felt that. So I was like, okay, cool. And then when I was thinking about, okay, well, what currently in your life feels restorative? Do you have those things? And I was like, I do. What's knolling? Anyone know what knolling is? Yeah, of course you do. You're creatives. Those of you who do, how would you describe it? What is knolling? Organizing to a grid. That's the most efficient way I've heard of that. So this is a little shot of the store. One of my favorite things to do is to take my time when I have a shift at the store and just organize everything to a little grid. And then, like, 20 minutes later, go back to the same table and kind of, like, tidy it again. It's so calming. By the way, the main theory is that when we organize things, there's serotonin is the big kind of thing that gets floods our brain. So, okay. So I was like, okay. And then also, like, walks in the park and, playing with my dog, some of the more typical stuff. So at this point, I was like, whoa, what if I do an exercise where I walk myself through really redefining life symmetry, not among how many hours am I, like, clocking into the company versus hanging out with my dog and not clunking into the company, like not that 40-60, but a different way. So because I'm a nerd that way, I also made a worksheet. And I kind of calibrated it and changed it and did all that and was like, awesome. So when Caitlin asked me if I would be interested in doing a talk on symmetry, I was like, yes, it will force me to kind of perfect this thing. So y'all want to do it together? Okay. Volunteers, get ready. So we're gonna hand out worksheets, and if you have something already to write with, like a notebook, feel free to pass on the clipboards to those who don't have something to write on, and you can just take a regular worksheet. We'll also be passing out pencils, which you can keep. The worksheets are also for you to keep. Don't open it. Okay, don't open it. Just look at the part. Mostly just because I don't want you distracted. We're gonna rush through this. So you see the part where it says restorative and growth. If you don't have one yet, it's cool. You'll have time. But let me start explaining it. So one of the first things is after the talk. Everyone's so excited. Thank you. So after the talk, I want you to consider defining your own version. Everyone with me? Everyone in the back with me? No, they're all discussing it still. That's cool. I'll just hang out. Okay, now I'm going to start. So after the talk, you will define for yourself, in case restorative and growth don't really fit how your brain thinks of those two states, I encourage you to come up with your own words. Mine were self-care and progress, but actually Mike, my husband, mentioned stability and exploration were felt the most right as words to him. So I encourage you after the talk to write down your own words for it. That's cool. But what you're going to be doing here is you're going to be filling out first the restorative or self-care part with activities that you find. By the way, I'm like coughing on sucking on 2 cough drops at once, and just so if you see me doing weird things, it's my throat. All right, I'm back. Write down things, activities that you find restorative, just you. So notice that on mine, these are examples from the one I did. Pedicures will never be on there for me, even though many people are like self-care, treat yourself, pedicure. The idea of a total complete stranger touching my toes and never making eye contact is so anxiety producing for me. So don't ever invite me to one. I won't be a good sport. But alone time. So restorative. Organizing, knolling, when it's nice and calm, I have time for it, so restorative. I'm not gonna lie, watching BBC mystery shows, I don't know what it is, so restorative. Friends, but not just any friend time. I encourage you to be specific as feels right. Because hanging out with at a 20-person party is the opposite of restorative for me. It's exhausting. But if it's a duo, just me and another person, or me and 2 other friends, so good. So be as specific as feels right for you. Go ahead and do that now. Questions? Okay. You have a minute. Write down at least 3. Okay, and then when you're ready, go on to the growth section. What do you find dopamine, endorphin rushing kind of activities, again, for you? So mine are kind of pretty straightforward. Marketing strategy, speaking events, making new workshops really feels like that sense of progress. But I also, when I was doing this exercise, there was meetings with Mimi. Mimi, raise your hand. Mimi's our manager at 11:11, and every time I have a meeting with her, I'm just like, yeah, what's next? Oh yeah, so I'm like, oh, yeah, those are great. Okay, anything at all. And remember that on my list, there was also Silk's class. So don't just think of work things. Think any activity that makes you feel pumped, or your version of pumped. Take a minute to do that. Write down at least 3 in that section. Okay. After the talk, I encourage you to take more time. Obviously, I just want to give you enough time so you take a nice kind of taste test of the exercise to see if it feels helpful for you. But everyone have at least 3 for each section. Okay. So here's the thing. When I got this far in the exercise for myself, already, I noticed something. That feeling of failure was completely gone. It was just gone. I no longer felt like a failure, like a bad boss to myself. In fact, when I was looking at my list, I was like, actually, my life is pretty awesome. Because I have a lot of things on both of these lists that I'm getting every week. So already, there's some things to tweak for sure. But I'm not failing at anything. And it helped me realize that so many of the details of my life, if I can go back, had been, over the past 3 or 4 years, I'd advocated and I'd gotten creative about how to get them in my life, to make sure I had time for them. So I was like, actually, this is great. Okay, here's the thing. I hope it does that for you too. That if you do nothing else besides just this part of the exercise, you already have moved away from maybe an antiquated, am I still on? Oh yeah, okay. An antiquated way of looking at work-life balance, and instead just thinking about life symmetry, and if you have it. But what if you're like, yeah, now that I've done this list, I realize that there is some things off. So had you asked me 2 years ago, I'd say, ooh, I'm getting way too much of this one. And I know that I should not be complaining. Aren't I so lucky? It doesn't matter. From a psychology perspective, this is not good. Too much of one. Or you might be like, no, I'm definitely getting enough of this. Whoa. So let's calibrate. What I want you to do is pick at least 1 or 2 per section, if they're there, that really have a huge impact for you. Those activities really matter, but you're not currently getting them enough or at all. You're like, oh, it's been months since I've exercised or taken that self class or had alone time. Whatever it is for you, just put an asterisk. I did 3 because I'm going to do a few different examples for you, but just 1 or 2 per section. Because next, okay, I want you to think about how many minutes or hours does it take for that activity to really have impact. For alone time, if you give me 1 hour of uninterrupted, no distractions alone time, it's like, okay. You give me 2, it's okay. I've experimented, and if you give me 4, it's magic. Magic. However, I added stretching on here as an exercise. Stretching, I really just need 10 minutes. If I take 1 minute, it's fine, but 10 minutes is actually pretty amazing if I get some stretching in. Friend time, I do not want a whole night. That's actually exhausting for me. I've noticed that about 1.5 hours, it's really nice. It's really good. So you define what's the right length of time for full impact to get the most from that activity. So write down just for the asterisk ones. Don't do it for all of them. And it's fine to guess. I had guessed 2 hours for alone time originally, and then I realized it wasn't, it was fine. It wasn't a lot. Because, here's a pretty critical part of it, I then want you to think about what's the frequency for that activity. For alone time, I do not want 4 hours of alone time every day. I wouldn't do very well. I don't even want 1 hour alone every day, actually. I really want 4 hours once a week. Again, I experimented with this and really got this frequency. Versus stretching, I really do, to really get the most out of it, I should be doing it daily, and it's also just 10 minutes, so that makes sense. Friend time, right now my schedule is so busy that if I get it once a month of like duo or trio time, that would feel great. Once a month would feel great. More would be better, but once a month will be great, and I'm not currently doing that. So you want to do that for all of them, because here was the part of the exercise where I was like, oh, things are starting to fit together. Because I've been working this many hours, I hear from a lot of folks, you should take a vacation. You need a vacation. which totally makes sense, right? That's what we do, 40, 60, if you work too many hours, you need a vacation, vacations are good. But I kept resisting a vacation, kept resisting it. And when someone asked me recently, I was like, I have zero interest in taking a vacation. And then when I heard myself, I was like, it's happened. I'm a workaholic. Oh no, I worked so hard to not be here. Okay, again, guilt. But doing this exercise made me realize, oh, that makes sense because some part of my brain understands that taking a 2-week vacation in the Bahamas or whatever, some sunny, beautiful place, isn't going to make up for the things that are massively missing in my life, like alone time, some time with friends and duos or trios, and a little stretching every day. That's not going to do that. It's like saying, you know what, my life is crazy right now, so I'm not going to sleep for 5 days, but then I have a 2-day window where I'm just going to sleep the whole time for 2 days, 48 hours, done, catch up. Anyone know what happens if you don't sleep for 5 days? You get cancer. Like, it's not a joke. The World Health Organization recently, I don't know if you saw this, classified graveyard shifts as carcinogenic. So right, that makes sense. Those of us who have worked graveyard shifts, that shit was intense, right? So we don't do that with sleep. We understand the frequency, the cycle of that restoration activity with sleep. And I realized, oh, it is the same with some of these other things. If I get 2 days of alone time once a quarter, that's great. But I need it also more frequently. So, by the way, this is not to say that 2 weeks of vacation suck, because 2-week vacations are pretty awesome. You might need them for different reasons, but they may not make up the other stuff. 4-week vacations, even better. Okay. Lastly, if it matters for that activity, one thing that's interesting about the brain is that not every hour is equal to the brain. When does that activity make the most sense, again, for impact, to do morning, afternoon, or evening? Is there a particular time of the day or night? So for me, the first 4 hours after I wake and the last 4 before I go to sleep of alone time is magical. If I get alone time between noon and 4, it's weirdly like just okay too. So that's good to note, so that when I go and carve out time for it, I'm not doing it when it's not even going to have an impact. Stretching, I really need to do it in the afternoon. That's really when probably endorphin, dopamine levels are a bit too high because I'm all pumped from the rest of the day, and I need to kind of reset. And friend time, afternoon or evenings. Set it for your own activities. So go ahead and write that down. Okay. So after the session, when you have more time, I encourage you to fill out, if you open up your worksheet, there's the whole how might I section. The how might I section is where you use that fantastic creativity of yours to figure out, how am I going to get this in? How might I experiment with the ways to get this activity back into my life, or at a frequency that feels right in my life, now that I've identified what my brain needs from it? So my example is, for the alone time, I was like, oh, I'm looking at my schedule week to week, and I think Fridays in the morning might be the best time to capture that, to try to experiment with carving that in. But probably there's more than one thing you need to do. I need to talk to Mimi, manager again, to like brainstorm scheduling stuff so I can see if I can do that. So what I want to say is, if you flip to the back side of your worksheet, I've included some tips. This is from back in the days when I did performance coaching with leaders, like CEOs and folks who had really busy schedules. And you'll see a bunch of tips back there for you later. And I also want to encourage you to talk to those people around you, because they are experts also at time management, but maybe about different things than you are. I think we forget. We seem to really like to gripe about time management with people, but it's very rare that I'll overhear coworkers or colleagues being like, so how do you fit in alone time? And I think that instead of being like, oh, I wish I could get alone time. We like doing that version. So try switching it and being like, hey, is that a thing that you found a way to do or something similar, and how do you do it? Encourage you. Okay. What have we covered really quickly? Use your creativity to define your own life symmetry, to see how that feels. Not by billable hours. That's really helpful for accounting and invoicing, for sure. But to actually assess your life and calibrate. Define what you really feel pumped and dopamine and endorphined up about versus what you feel is really restorative and self-care. And make sure that you define it by the frequency of that activity versus waiting for that 2-week vacation to fix the rest of your life for you. It will do a lot. 2-week vacations are cool, but it may not do these things for you, right? And take questions now that you've gotten to try it out. And thank you for joining us.
Okay. It's going to be available online.
Oh, thank you.